All right, we are live. Since this is Frankie's interview, Frankie's going to be running this this live show. So whenever Frankie's ready, we're going to get going.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just throwing it in some Facebook groups here because Facebook doesn't make this easy on you sometimes, and they like to make you jump through a couple of hoops, which is fun. So fun.
Well, since Frankie is getting that done, I'll do the introductions. We have David from Canuck Play, and if you don't know of Canuck Play, they are the main guys who are doing the Doug Flutie Maximum Football. I think Maximum Football 20 is coming out on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Some big announcements have just came out, so we're going to talk about that today and get a little bit more in depth about the game and how everything kind of came about.
Right. So I guess we can kick it off here, Dave, by asking you what particularly about this year's game gets you the most excited?
Well, first, thanks for having me on and showing interest in the project. It's always good to connect with folks that appreciate what we're doing. For 2020, I think the thing that is going to stand out the most is generally the performance improvements in terms of just the player movement and the physics. Certainly the on-field stuff. You're going to see a much smoother gameplay than we've had in the past. The physics is more interactive. There's less of players just sort of touching each other and falling over. The collisions are more natural and more fluid. So for the on-field gameplay stuff, that's what we focused on. For the off-field feature set, I think people are going to get a real kick out of the play designer. The 2020 edition allows you to create plays for both offense and defense. So really interested in seeing what play designs people come up with for this year's title. It allows people to be a little bit more creative. It's also something that hasn't been in a game for quite a long time. I'm not aware of a console-based football game that's had a play designer in it for many, many years. So this is something for people to try out again.
Yeah. And you guys also are now making your game with Unity, correct?
Yes.
So what kind of different things does that allow you to do, and how much better overall is that going to make your game?
Well, I've been using Unity since the beginning, since I started this project, Maximum Football and Canadian Football 17, back in late 2015 is when I kicked off the development, and I've been using Unity since then. It's not a new. We haven't switched to Unity from something else this year. It's just been the tool of choice. I picked Unity because it has a far better development system than other engines do. Other engines use a drag and drop coding, connecting the dots type coding system. Unity actually uses real code, so it's a better tool for making a game like a sports title. And we partnered with Unity Professional Services going into 2020 and brought in some of their engineers into the studio, and they helped me make some performance improvements to the game, which is really what drives the better physics and the better on-field gameplay, because we were able to take the game from running at around 30 frames a second with a little bit choppy animations, and you could see the stuttering and that sort of thing, to running at 60 frames a second, and the animations are much smoother, the tackles are more fluid. So it really helped with the on-field side of things, which is where we always try to focus most of our efforts. So that's really the big difference that you'll see for 2020 when it comes to the underlying game engine.
Now, as far as being like a super small studio compared to the guys over at EA, what has it been as an experience for you to be as long lasting as you have been so far, especially because when you look at some of the smaller projects in football games that try to be an alternative to Madden, they don't typically last more than a year or two. So you guys have kind of found a nice little niche market so far. So what has it been for you to still be standing at this point?
Well, it's interesting. I do see a lot of startups from other groups that make a lot of claims, and they have great ideas, but they also don't necessarily have the background in actually making these games. And then I see a lot of folks, they get into it and they realize, oh, this is really hard. and then it's just, it runs out of steam because they hit roadblocks that they're not necessarily have the experience to try and get around. So that's kind of what I see when I see other groups starting to trying to develop football games, particularly sports games in general. They are the hardest type of game to try and make. Sports games, because they're replicating real life, that makes them extraordinarily difficult to try and replicate in game form. And then you're adding the most complicated sport on top of that. So it is a big undertaking to try and take on, and you really have to have some experience doing it before you try it to take on a project like that. I've also been lucky in that I've had the support from friends and family and that sort of thing, that you're working through anniversaries, and you're working long weekends, and you're working long hours, and you have to be able to make that commitment to bring a title to the market, and a lot of people may not necessarily have that sort of interest in doing that sort of thing. They, making these games has to be your number one commitment, and a lot of people just don't have that ability. So I've been kind of lucky in terms of I've been able to do that, and I think that's why we're still around.
Now, also, you guys started off by making pretty much a Canadian football focused game, and you kind of switched your focus
on the console. Maximum Football goes back to 2005, and that was a PC game that was essentially more or less the same concept as what the game is now. But when I brought the first console version of the game, it was purely Canadian rules. Yeah.
Right. So what kind of inspired that switch to go back to a US college game, as well as Canadian college and Canadian football as well?
Well, one of the driving forces behind Maximum Football is to grow the sport of gridiron football in this country. And when I launched Canadian Football 17, it was on launch day, it was purely Canadian football, and it was focused solely on the 3-down sport in the Canadian market. And it was really more driving the learning curve for Canuck to get a game onto a console and go through that development process and go through the certification process and learn those things that you need to learn and know to be able to bring more sophisticated versions of the game to those platforms. The Xbox One and the PS4 certification process, very different than the certification process that I'd done with the 360 and the PS3. So had to learn those processes and workflows from scratch, basically. And the idea was to start with a simple game. I had been paying for the development completely out of pocket. So the idea was start with a very simple game, just covers the basics of the basics of a football game engine that processes down and distance and penalties and that sort of thing. Has some very basic visuals in terms of player models, that sort of thing, and then get it onto the market so that we can generate some revenue into the studio and and have some money in the bank so that I can do things like add motion capture, so that I can hire contractors to redo the player models and start growing the game. But you have to start from somewhere, and the decision was made to start with something that was as simple as possible, so that it was something that I could actually build and get to market. And I purposely left out all of the bells and whistles and other features and things that you see in other titles, just so it was something that I could build. And then as the game evolved, the realization that the Canadian market by itself isn't really large enough to support a standalone title. So if we want to generate enough revenue to add more motion capture and to add all these features and to hire more staff, we really have to be able to get into the larger US market, which meant also adding in, the US rule sets and the college football dynasty modes and things like that appealed to a broader audience. So allowing us to grow the sport, grow the game internationally, but also in a way sort of stay true to the roots of giving the smaller market access to its own game, even if it's a subset of a bigger one.
I have a question real quick. For people who may not know, you have a sim league coming out for the 2020 version. Can we talk a little bit about that, how that's going to run? I know there's some people out there that are kind of a little bit confused on how everything's gonna work. So.
Well, the Sim League is being operated by my business partner, Eric Spearin. So some of these questions may be better asked of Eric. He's the brains behind the Sim League. But essentially, the idea is you will take ownership of a team and manage that team, and we'll simulate the games on our servers and broadcast the results. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Now, my next question regards the newest version of consoles that are coming out, and pre-orders for Xbox have just opened and they're going crazy already. What are your plans as games start to shift to this newest generation of consoles?
Well, we have publishing agreements in place for both the next gen console, PS4, PS5, and the Xbox Series X. And they are going to be available publicly before the end of the year. We really didn't have a whole lot of time to accommodate new features and new visuals specifically for those new platforms for 2020. They will work. The games will run. The 2020 edition of the game will run on those new platforms. But in terms of taking advantage of the capabilities of the new platforms, that's something we're really striving for in 2021. It just gives us more time to accommodate the capabilities of the new hardware. Our development cycle didn't really align very well with the release schedule for the new platforms, and it's just how that worked out. So the 2020 edition will run, and you'll be able to play the games on the new platforms, but they will look pretty much the same as they do on the current gen. So it's 2021 that we're really focusing on. What can we do for next gen?
Yeah, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, because that's still a whole nother launch away.
Yeah.
But so you guys are working on graphical stuff for that then, I'm guessing?
Yeah, we have our roadmap is our roadmap. One of the things on the roadmap for 2021 is looking at what we can do from the visuals standpoint to take advantage of the new hardware. We looked at changing some of the visuals for 2020, but the reality was that with the new hardware coming down the road and the PS4 and the Xbox X sort of being phased out, it didn't really make a lot of financial sense for us to spend time and money redoing visuals for this current generation of consoles when we would have had to just turn around in 6 months and redo them for next gen anyway. So we kind of just made some adjustments to lighting and tweaked some of the background shaders a little bit so that the existing assets look better, but the visual targets for 2021 are going to be very different because we'll be running on different hardware.
Now, again, we talked about the smaller studio. Is it difficult to find enough time and resources to upgrade the things that you guys want to upgrade, or is it kind of like a as do as much as you can before the game does come out?
Well, when Eric and I and the rest of the small team, we get together at the beginning of the year and we look at what we have achieved up to that point, and we look at some of the things that the football sim community is asking for. And then I do it goes through a vetting process to make sure that some of the ideas and some of the suggestions, while really good and really innovative, I couldn't possibly build those. So I look at the things, what can I actually do? And right now, because I'm the lone person writing code, it really comes down to what can I write the code for in 3 or 4 or 5 months and actually make it work. The goal is always to find the capable developers and the capable engineers that we can bring on board. It's a bit of a challenge finding folks that have those skill sets in the AAA console space that want to work on something as complicated as a sports game. And also, we're not, the Canuck Play studio is not in the GTA. We're not in a great big market. So they also have to be willing to live in a smaller city that's sort of outside of the GTA. And that is just a challenge. I mean, every game studio in the country is fighting for those same limited resources of really skilled and talented engineers, and engineers have a bit of an advantage in that because there's such a demand for their skill sets, they can often work on the titles that they want to work on. So one of the challenges is finding the skill set and also the interest in working on something like a sports title.
Now, I don't want to get you into a spot where you've got to talk about a competitor or anything, but do you take any lessons from this launch of Madden being reviewed as terribly as it was to build your game and find places that you can gain a little bit of an edge over that kind of a competition?
I actually don't spend a lot of time looking at Madden. I really don't. We're just trying to do our own thing. And yes, I mean, obviously those sorts of reviews and things come through my Twitter feed just because it's the nature of the beast. Stuff pops up in my feeds. But EA is focusing on a very different type of experience with their product than Canuck Play is trying to deliver. They have a lot of additional challenges and things that I don't have. I cannot do some of the things that they're doing. I mean, Canuck Play is not in a position right now to provide online head-to-head. So that's a feature that they offer. Canuck Play is trying to offer features to our player base that EA is either not interested in providing, or they don't want to, or you can't provide. So I don't necessarily look at what Madden's doing too much. And yeah, they're having a bit of a rough go of it this year. I'm pretty sure that COVID has a big role to play in that. When your engineering staff and your QA staff is trying to work from home, that adds a level of complexity to something like Madden. But really, we just try to do our own thing and worry about what I can deliver. And I don't spend a lot of time looking at what Madden does.
And you bring up a good point with COVID and everything too. For you guys, a game that changes so much from year to year, just getting better and better. What was that whole situation like for you guys?
COVID impacted our hiring because it was really hard to we want our engineers working in studio as opposed to remotely. It's just far better to manage and collaborate, and trying to write something as complicated as a sports game remotely is just a challenge we didn't want to try and take on. So it did impact hiring, but in terms of me doing my day-to-day, it had very little impact on me whatsoever. I came into the studio every day just as per normal. I've got an office by myself, so there's social distancing just by the fact that I'm here alone. So in terms of our team, many of the group is working remotely anyway. Our UI designer is in the United States, and my business partner is in Hamilton, and we've been working with remotely via Slack for 3 years now, and we just carried on doing that same sort of thing. So other than impacting our plans for hiring new engineers and new staff, I don't know it necessarily had a big impact in my work.
That's good to hear, because like I said, your game has grown year over year, and it's been fantastic to see a game that, we see growth in, because, as someone, I play Madden all the time, right? We don't get a whole bunch every year to be excited about. So I'm glad to hear that it hasn't been impacted too much.
Yeah, it's it's stubbornness, I think, is the answer there. You just don't let these things get in the way, and you find solutions to work around these things, and you just keep going. And I think sometimes I try to do these things just despite the obstacles.
Now, before we started streaming, I brought up the question to you about the agreement that you guys reached with Football Canada, and
Right.
I know you were saying that it won't be in the game on launch, but what was the importance of getting that deal done, and what does that mean for you guys going down the road here?
Well, I think just to reiterate, we're not going to have any Football Canada content on launch. The agreement came we were already passing certification for our builds through Microsoft and Sony when that agreement was put into place. So we really had pretty much finished the game at that point. So we are looking at doing Football Canada content as one of our content updates in probably late October or November. But what it really does is it shows that Maximum Football has reached the point where other organizations are starting to take the project seriously. When I started this whole sort of story in 2015, and I was reaching out to organizations and saying, here's my idea. This is what I want to try to do. This is what I want to try to bring to the market. A lot of these organizations were very dismissive because nobody had ever done it before. And they all look at other titles and they say, well, here's this one dude in his basement, and he's going to try to do this thing where other studios are hundreds of people in gigantic studios in downtown Vancouver. It's never going to happen. So it was really hard to get partners on board. But then it did happen, and we've been making it happen for 3, 4, 5 years now. And what's happened is people have started to realize that, oh, wait a minute, they are actually doing what they've said they're going to do, and they are actually achieving their goals, and they are actually shipping things on time. And there's a reputation that we've built up that is, when we say we're going to do something, we actually do it and ship it. And so we've become a little bit easier in terms of respectable partners with organizations like Football Canada and other leagues in the United States and things like that. And by getting organizations like Football Canada on board and bringing their clout, well, now that snowballs, and other organizations look and say, well, if they're on board, then we can get on board. And so it's starting to snowball, and that's only a good thing, because the more exposure we get for bringing the sport of gridiron football into the country, and growing it, regardless of the rule set, just the sport in general, I think is a good thing, because I'd like to see it grow here.
Now, I believe you guys went to the CFL when this first started, and they didn't want much of a part of it. But now that you have Football Canada, do you think that can open up the door again to go back down that avenue?
Well, when I approached the CFL back in 2016, they were looking for a very different experience. They were looking for a product that targeted a much younger demographic than Maximum Football targets. They were looking for a very different feature set. They were looking for a very different experience. They weren't necessarily looking for a simulation football game. They were looking for an arcade experience that was focused on a much younger audience. We don't necessarily know what the Football Canada agreement will change in terms of what they're looking for, but we really just have to wait and see how that all works out. We know that the staff from 2016 is completely changed now. It's 100% turnover in the league office. But the reality is right now, I mean, they didn't have a season this year. So I think their focus is very much about getting back on the field, the real field, as opposed to getting into the virtual field, which is, the right decision. They need to make sure that they're playing games before they worry about video games. So we'll see how it all works out in the next few months, and maybe something will come along and we'll have an announcement. But right now, we're not really sure.
I have a question about how you went with Doug Flutie. Like, how did that start up? Obviously, I assume you approached him and whatnot. But how did that kind of snowball into it being the actual game name?
Well, in 2018, I was still working by myself and trying to do everything myself, the coding of the game, creating the 3D assets, and also running the business and trying to establish these partnerships. And that's just too much. One person, that's way too much for one person. And the business side of things is not the strongest of my skill sets anyway. So in 2018, just around the time that the game was launching, I was approached by a man named Eric Spearin, who operates out of Hamilton, and he's a big football gamer and a big sports gamer. And he came on board and decided that, we'd split the workload into two things. He would manage the business operations side and the business partnerships and things like that, and I could just concentrate on making the game. And when on launch day in 2018, we sat down in a room and brainstormed about, this is the vision for where we want to see the game. This is what we want, where we want to go, but we're so small right now. Well, how do we get to where we want to go? And one of the things that came up immediately was, well, it would really help if we had a brand ambassador, if we could put a real athlete's name on the product. And we just had to look at other products like earlier football games like Joe Montana football or other sports titles like Wayne Gretzky hockey. They put an athlete's name on it, and by associating it with an athlete that is a legend in the sport, it garnered a lot of interest. So we knew that Maximum Football's was going to evolve into more of a U.S. college game, and that's where we were going to try and separate ourselves from the pack, because everybody's trying. All the existing football games on the market were either an NFL licensed game or they were trying to replicate an NFL experience, and we just wanted to sort of move over to the left a little bit and not be an NFL Me Too. So we focused on the college aspects of football. And then we realized, well, wait a minute, we've got college football. We do have a US pro experience if that's what you want. And we also have the Canadian experience as well. So Doug Flutie excelled in all of those three levels of football. And he's a Hall of Famer, and and everybody who understands and knows the sport knows that name. So Eric reached out to his agent, and Doug and his agent were at the time starting to think about, well, how can we get into the gaming space, or how can we get into apps, or how can we get into the digital space, and what would help grow the Doug Flutie brand. And so we really just knocked on their door at exactly the right time. It was just how it worked out. And everybody saw the potential right away. And it was really an easy process to get everybody aligned and get the agreements in place. And then Doug Flutie was on board for 2019, and we've been pretty happy with very happy with that partnership and how everything's been working out so far. So that's kind of how it worked out. We just approached them at the right time with the right concept.
So with the whole, like, this is going to NCAA, with the whole new agreements in place where players can now make money off their name and likeness, should we be seeing, or could we be seeing NCAA schools, or even is there talk of youth sports schools being integrated into the game in the near future for 2021 or 2022?
Well, the schools, the NCAA, Eric and I did have conversations with the NCAA and the U Sport / CIS, and they both those organizations came back at the time and said, we're just not interested in video games. It's too high risk legally. The NCAA had been sued dramatically a few years prior, and while U Sport had never been legally had run into any legal troubles, they looked down south and said, "Ooh, we don't want any part of that." So they learned from the NCAA's experience and sort of shied away. In terms of the players, I'm not necessarily sure anybody's going to be doing that anytime soon, because there is nothing. That agreement is really designed to allow players to generate revenue off of, say, a YouTube channel or selling jerseys, because those are individual things that an individual can manage. To try and bring, and all those contracts are specific to an individual. So if we wanted to bring NCAA players into a video game, we have to reach out to every single player individually and sign and negotiate a contract and sign an agreement. And that is really the job of a union. For professional leagues, you go to the union, or the Players Association, and you negotiate a blanket contract that covers all the players that are currently part of that association. And you're dealing with one group that looks after a wide variety of players. These individual reach out to one player and get them to sign an agreement, and reach out to another player and get them to sign an agreement, and reach out to another player and get them signed. That's very impractical. And you'd also have lots of fighting over, well, I want this much money and this guy now wants this much more money, and you're trying to manage who gets what royalties and that sort of thing. It's a logistical nightmare to try and manage that sort of thing. So I really am not sure that you're going to see NCAA anything in video games anytime soon. The schools aren't interested, and the players, because they're not in a union, they're not in an association, it's logistically extremely difficult to bring them into the game.
Now, have you guys brought in current players to capture animations?
We used 4 players from McMaster University a couple of years ago to do motion capture. So we are using real athletes to do the motion capture. And it is something that we're pretty proud of, that we can say, hey, we use these athletes that are now in the professional ranks to do all of our animations in the game. So it's something that does sort of separate us from other indie football games, is that we have actual athletes doing our animations for us. So to go back to your previous question a little earlier about, what does Madden do? Well, Madden uses real athletes for its animations, and so do we. So there is at least one area of we're the same.
Now, we talked to Isaac Harker last week, and I told him that I would drop his name to you because he's very, very interested in the video game scene. He says he's got access to all kinds of guys that he would love to get signature animations for. So had to drop his name in there because I promised him I would.
Okay, well, we will look at that. Signature animations is probably it may be something we look at, but Maximum Football, our mandate is to always make sure that the base of the football simulation is the priority over things like, mouth guards or individual player likenesses or signature animations or being able to pick a touchdown celebration or the little gimmicks. We want to make sure that, our zone coverage works. We want to make sure that our blocking schemes are correct. So that is our focus is always more towards making sure that the football is correct and adding those other things after. But certainly something we can look at for next year.
I think sports gaming fans appreciate that too. Like, again, that's that's a complaint with.
So some do. I do see reviews and comments about, their reviewers. There's a couple of reviewers out there that are 100% focused on visuals. They wouldn't know a cover 2 defense if they had to throw a football into one, but they know visuals, and so we're reviewed against that sort of thing, and that's one of our biggest challenges is trying to get people to understand that we're more about the football first and the visuals second, but we still get reviewed against visuals not being AAA because we're not a AAA studio.
Now, let's flash back a little bit to that first Canadian football game that came out on these consoles. The reviews were not in your favor at all, and a lot of them were just. It felt like a lot of people didn't understand that this was a very small studio with their first crack at a game on these new consoles. Was it difficult for you to look at those and see that people were rating something that you had created so poorly, or was it kind of motivation to come back stronger with the next one?
It was expected. When I made the conscious decision to keep it as simple as possible to get a game on the market that is as complicated as a football title, I absolutely knew what I was signing up for. People are going to compare it to a AAA studio. The 99.9% of the people reviewing the game had no idea that it was a one-man, literally at the time, one man working in his basement. They just see console football game and immediately think there's, 50 people working on it, 100 people. And there's no realization that, oh, wait a minute, this is, you cannot fairly compare the two because they're incomparable. I mean, you're trying to, at the time, you're sort of trying to compare a family sedan to a sports car. I mean, they're not even in the same market. But the point of Canadian Football 17 was never to be a Madden killer. It was not the point. The point was, I'm bootstrapping this. I'm paying for this completely out of pocket. We need to get some revenue into a studio so that I can grow the team and I can make a better product and add features and improve the visuals. But you have to start somewhere. And I think that was absolutely the right choice, because when I look around at other groups that have tried to start a project like this and they don't get anywhere, they don't write one single line of code and then they fail and then they go away. Well, that just hammers home the fact that I think I made the right decision in terms of how to approach this. Start basic, start small, start simple, start with a foundation, and then grow it from there, and just deal with the negativity. And that has eventually gone away for a lot of the part. Their Maximum Football 19 was released, and we grew a big audience. And 2020 is coming along, and people are seeing the improvements, and the audience and the the community is growing and growing and growing and growing. So there's a little bit of a validation in the decision-making process at the beginning. So I don't necessarily worry about it too much now.
What do you think? Because we've seen, guys like Rod Peterson and a couple of other YouTube channels start streaming the games to kind of mimic a CFL season. What do you think that has done for not just the game, but for the studio itself?
Well, I think it's raised some awareness. I've been very, I've been surprised when I first saw the numbers coming in that they were posting about their audience numbers. I wasn't sure how to take that, because I was very excited. I was very happy to see numbers like that, but I was also a little bit taken back by the fact that, well, wait a minute, there's this many people are watching a game that I made. This is a little bit surreal. So it has helped raise awareness of the game, and it's also helped fill in a hole that was left this year because of no season in the real world. And so I'm happy that we could sort of do a small part of trying to help people get through the no football season. And that is that it goes again to show that some organizations are taking us a little bit more seriously now, because they look at the simulation, the CFL sim experience and that experiment, and how well that's turning out, and showing and proving to others that there is actually an appetite for this sort of experience. And that's generating people reaching out to us and saying, hey, how can we get involved? I kind of think that is perhaps how Football Canada found us and reached out, and that's turning into something much bigger. So I think the CFL sim experience and that experiment is working out for everybody involved.
Shane, you got anything else?
No, I think you've answered all my questions regarding the game and what's going on. I've been a fan for the last couple of years. I'm also part of the MNG crew that is working on the sim league. So getting some of the answers there was helpful. Talking about the Football Canada agreement, I answered all my questions regarding the game.
Great.
Yeah, we're super thrilled to see the game. It comes out on September
25th.
Or on Friday.
Yep.
Which I can't remember the date.
25th.
25th. There we go. So a little bit of a Christmas in September there, I guess. But yeah, we're super excited to have that game come out. It will be put on my console pretty quickly afterwards. So yeah, we appreciate you coming on, giving us a little bit of insight about the game, and we're excited for what the future holds with it.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.